Good evening and welcome to this evening's Lyme Community Forum. My name is Chris Ramsden. I'm a Lyme resident and volunteer on the Lyme Community Development Committee. In April 2017, the Select Board chartered the Lyme Community Development Committee, initially named the Lyme Economic Development Committee, now referred to as LCDC. Our charge was to gather baseline data and consider tax impact of various kinds of development in Lyme. After a year of meeting, the LCDC privately raised $15,000 to retain a consultant. In the summer and fall of 2018, along with members of the Planning Board, the LCDC worked with Resilience Planning of Plymouth, New Hampshire to produce the slides that you're going to see this evening. I'd like to ask all the members of the Development Committee and the Planning Board who are present to raise their hands. Many of these people have been meeting and discussing these topics for the past 18 months, and I wanted to say we appreciate everyone's efforts. Thank you. This is our first public forum to present the findings of the consultants. We are video recording this so that we can replay it for additional public forums in February and March. We will try to schedule additional forums at different times and different days so that all Lyme residents can view it if they want. We hope that these forums are the beginning of a conversation about Lyme and what they would like to do regarding development. The agenda that I hope to follow is as follows. I'll ask Steve from Resilience Planning to introduce himself and present slides along with Russ. I will try to limit questions and interruptions so we can get through all their slides. After the slide presentation, we'll open the forum to questions from the audience. I'll try to moderate, and we have a microphone, so I'll try to bring that around so we can hear on the recording. We're going to conclude at 9 o'clock or before we run out of questions. And if people have additional questions, they can certainly write them down, and we'll collect them, and we'll try to respond to them in the next few weeks if we don't get them to them tonight. A reminder that the evening's forum slides are posted on a link on the Lyme website. So that's the introduction, and I'd like to bring Steve up. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Steve Whitman. What I'm going to do is, I'm kind of like the opening band, and Russ is the headliner. We worked together on this project and been meeting with the committee and the planning board, as Chris described. But I want to provide you with just a little bit of context so you have a sense, if you haven't seen the slides, kind of what the scope of the project was and things that we were learning about the town. Some of the things we were learning you know all too well. But if you bear with me, I have a couple of slides, and then we'll get into more of the analysis. So, I am with Resilience Planning and Design. Russ Tebow, who you'll be hearing from a lot tonight, is with AER based in Laconia. And so this is what we're going to go over this evening. We're going to give you a brief overview of the study itself, talk a little bit about Lyme's land use pattern, which is one of the things that we looked at early on in this study. And then in planning implications related to that. Then we'll get into municipal expenditures, taxes, and development scenarios, what a lot of you are here to talk about tonight. Russ has a lot to share, and so it'd be great if you do jot down questions you have, as specific as they may be. And then we'll get into questions, comments, and discussion. Okay, so what were we asked to do? As Chris said, we started in the summer of 2018, and what we were asked to do was initially do a survey of existing conditions. That was a lot of data collection and a lot of conversations with select board members, planning board members, the LCDC, department heads, but a few other things I want to make sure that we focus on here. These stakeholder interviews and focus groups happened in August. We then were able to gather department head data as well as data from the school. We met with officials from the school as part of our data collection. Russ then gathered an awful lot of regional and statewide data that you'll be seeing tonight that was used. And then a lot of the work after the initial calculations was back and forth with LCDC and the planning board, getting more context about Lyme, more data, addressing their questions to try to refine the study. So a lot of effort was spent from September through November doing that. And the scope of the study is really looking at municipal trends, some potential development scenarios to see what we can learn from that exercise, but it doesn't include parcel level analysis. So if you're hoping to get an answer about a particular parcel, that's not this study. So as far as existing land use and zoning go, you're probably aware, and a lot of you probably live here because of the extensive natural resources that you have. It's a beautiful, beautiful community. It was a treat to get to spend time here and get to take a closer look. But those extensive natural resources also can be viewed as constraints to development in some cases. Primarily rural residential development pattern, also probably not a big surprise to all of you. And of particular note is the lack of water and sewer infrastructure. So that does present some limitations for development. Limited telecommunications, but it sounds like that is changing. So that's exciting. And then we spent some time talking with the planning board about the expanded commercial zone and the limits of the other zones, especially within the villages, what the potential for development was under the existing land use regulations. So here's a map that the town was able to give us that shows the extent of the commercial zone down here, shows the various villages that have some zoning that goes beyond just residential development. But you notice that it's a very limited area zoned for commercial development, but there are other limitations such as traffic volume that Russ will touch on, and other economic limitations that are probably more of an issue than the amount of available land. Okay. Next. It's you, buddy. Hey, you're just getting settled in.
I know. I was enjoying it too much. You had me mesmerized.
I doubt that.
Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.
I want to first of all thank the committee that we worked with and the planning board. I've been very fortunate in my career, much of which has been spent here in New Hampshire. But before I moved back to New Hampshire in '76, I worked in 35 different states doing this kind of work. But I've really enjoyed working in Lyme because Lyme is kind of like a textbook case of a small community that is large enough to have issues, but small enough to be able to see them fairly transparently. The resources that are here, the people that we work with, just spectacular. So I have enjoyed every moment of this assignment. And I hope that you learn from the time that I spent here with the committee, with the staff of the city, of the town, and but I honestly have enjoyed working on this study. I am an economist, a regional economist that looks at the relationship between growth and development and things like taxes and demographics. That's sort of my specialty as a regional economist. There's some caveats that are really important, and it really is a combination of art and science. I work with numbers. As a hobby, I do watercolor painting. The beauty of watercolor painting is you can do a sketch, and it's clearly just a sketch and not a finished work. But when you're working with numbers, a 1 always looks like a 1, and a 2 always looks like a 2. So even if there's a little bit of a preliminary aspect to it, it nonetheless is important to remember there's a lot of art that goes into it as well. So we're trying to deal with facts and abstract from those facts observations that are meaningful to you as residents of the community. The other thing to remember is that unlike a lot of things, public services are provided to the community as a whole. Fire protection is provided irregardless of the assessed value of an individual housing. That wasn't always the case. It used to be you subscribed to get fire protection. So public services like education, fire protection, police protection are not offered in discrete units. It's sort of like everybody gets the protection if you're in town. And that can affect, for example, when you're trying to measure the impact of new development, how much does it really cost to have one more house in line to service that one more house? Maybe not too much. But if you had 100 or 200, maybe it becomes meaningful. So part of that is that the protection that you offer, the services that you offer, are public services, and by their nature, they're not offered in discrete units. So cost estimating can be a bit of a challenge. Another aspect to bear in mind is that some of your costs are fixed. If you had 10 more students in this school, it would cost no more to heat this room than it does today. So that also complicates the analysis. And what I'm getting at here is I'm trying to measure or illustrate for you and improve your understanding of if you had 100 more units in line, what impact would it have on the existing residents, and particularly taxes. And all of these factors enter into it and are really kind of limitations to the accuracy of the analysis. I think in general what I'm trying to do when I do a study like this is it really a good thing? Is it kind of neutral? Or is it really a bad thing that I'm looking at? And I do a lot of impact studies when new development is proposed. And in all cases I say, I'm really trying to find out, is it generally good, kind of neutral, or pretty lousy? And so the level of, we're not dealing with decimal points here, we're dealing with trying to deal with big items. Steve, the basics, will it likely, as I said, have a meaningful positive impact on the town? Will it be about break even, or will it have a major negative influence? So that's what I'm really trying to do here, is get the big picture in place and hopefully in your minds in a way that if you disagree, you have good questions and a foundation for those questions. One of the aspects is what level of development is feasible in Lyme? I know from our discussions that there are some people in the community that feel Lyme needs more development, and other people that feel that Lyme doesn't need more development. So maybe a place to start is what is feasible in terms of new development, so that we're playing the game in the right ballpark, right? Okay? So, Steve. So I started with residential development. There was a significant demand for new housing in the Upper Valley region that could easily spill over into Lyme because it's such an attractive community with such great public services. The Upper Valley Regional Planning Commission in 2012 conducted a housing needs assessment, and there's a 10-year need for some 3,300 to 5,500 new housing units in the Upper Valley. And of those, around 1,200 to almost 2,000 should be affordable workforce housing. This was done in 2012. We move ahead 6 more years to today, and the need for additional housing in the Upper Valley is even more intense, okay? You have the lowest unemployment rate in the state, under 3%, under 2.5%, and there's a pressing need for new housing to balance out the regional economy. So when it comes to housing, there is not really an issue of is there a demand for new housing in Lyme? Unquestionably, is the demand for new housing in Lyme. And so if you were to have permissible zoning for housing, you would be able to attract, I'm sure, a wide range of housing units. Whether that's desirable or not is something for you to decide, but the point is, there is that pie there for you to get a slice of. See? If you look at the traffic counts in Lyme, they generally are under 3,000 cars per day. The Diamond Highway is about 2,900 cars per day. I looked at this in order to determine, is there in effect, latent demand for new retail development, larger scale retail development. I know that, given the character of Lyme, that's not something that appeals to many of you. But my question was, is it even feasible to think about it as a way to improve your tax structure? Okay? Because many communities do go this route. See? I think major, larger scale commercial development is unlikely in Lyme. The traffic counts are generally too low. They're 1/10 or less of what you need to support a significant retail presence. Your population is not high enough or growing fast enough to attract a major retail development. You do not have municipal sewer or water. I'm working right now in Stratford, New Hampshire, and they're looking desperately to bring sewer and water in in order to attract a larger amount of non-residential development. But here in Lyme, you don't have that sewer water, which larger complex of retail development would expect. There's a very limited amount of prime, properly zoned land. The scale of your community is very attractive as it is, and it does favor lower density development. And lastly, I think the market would support lower density retail and office uses, possibly in combination with residential uses, along the lines of what you already have. So if somebody out there is thinking a Walmart, you're probably in the wrong community, right? That is probably not, that kind of development is not feasible here. Smaller scale office, retail, possibly combined with residential at a village scale is possible, but not a major factor. We're not talking hundreds of thousands of square feet. Next, I wanted to look at kind of the demographic and financial background of the community, kind of provide a bedrock analysis and understanding of the way things are in Lyme. Steve. First of all, Lyme is growing slowly. I know these are hard to see from where you are, but if we go back to 2000, Lyme's population was about 1,700. It's now about 1,750. So you are a slow-growing community. If you contrast that to Grafton County between 2000 and 2018 added over 10,000, net growth of 10,000, Lyme 84. And the projected population growth is not substantial either for Lyme. So slow-growing community is one of the characteristics of this community. I suspect a lot of you like it that way. In terms of housing units, the change between 2000 and 2018 was 88 housing units, net growth. Again, relatively slow growth. That compares to 9,800 countywide, okay, between 2000 and 2018. Project that out, maybe another, according to the state's forecast, maybe another 25 to 50 more housing units between now and the next 5 years. You do have vacant and second homes, but not a major factor. Of the total number of housing units in Lyme in 2018, there were 840 housing units. Of those, 100, just over 100 were second homes or vacant seasonal homes. Not a large, huge inventory, but somewhat of a factor in the community. And the households, which is people related or unrelated living in a housing unit, there might be families, there might be people living together, about 730 households. So, and the household growth, 50 between 2000 and 2018. So what we have is a sparsely populated community that's growing slowly, really very slowly, within a county that is growing much more rapidly, particularly if you get towards this end of Grafton County near the Hanover area. Lyme is comparatively affluent and older with a higher than typical tax burden than the county average. Okay? How many people are surprised by that? Raise your hand. Okay. One. You're joking. You taught me this. Thank you. Thank you. Median household income, Lyme, $118,000. The county, $57,000. Essentially twice the county average. So that's fortunate, because it plays into other factors and other facets of Lyme that are important. So the typical median home value in 2018, just over $450,000. Very healthy, compared to a countywide average of $212,000. Again, twice as much. Tax rate is higher at $27 versus $21 per thousand. And this is a number that, I gotta say, caught my attention, and I know has caught the attention of a lot of the people in this room, which is if you multiply the tax rate times the assessed value, the average tax burden in Lyme, annual tax burden for those residences is about $12,000 a year, as compared to $4,600. And I think that concern about these two numbers, particularly the Lyme number of 12,000, is what underlies the thought that was a prelude to having us do this work for you. The median age, 50, older than average, counties 43, and the percent of population age 65 or over, almost 1 in 5 residents here, and about the same as in the county, but the median age nonetheless is higher in Lyme than the county median age. So a little bit older, more affluent, more expensive housing is the kind of community that we're dealing with here compared to Grafton County. The tax base in Lyme is heavily residential. 93% of your tax base is residential land and buildings. And current use is inventoried as taxable, not market value. It's taxable value, not as market value. So the line is the blue bars. Residential land, 35%. In the county, 28%. Residential buildings in line, 58%. In the county, 49%. Commercial land and buildings in line, 4%. In the county, 13%. So 1/4 as much non-residential tax base as is typical for Grafton County. Yep. We're kind of building a case here for what is it about this town? And it's good to do it on a comparative basis. Obviously, Grafton County is a very diverse county. It reaches, you know, from here into over in the Lincoln area, Plymouth. But nonetheless, I think it is useful to say how are we compared to other communities, the general community structure in Grafton County. So the non-residential is tax base is stable and minimal. The residential building valuations have increased significantly. This is between 2006 and 2017, an 11-year period. Everything else very stable. So your growing tax base is residential. Residential buildings, residential land is what's contributing to the higher assessed valuation in Lyme. So if we do things on a per capita basis, Lyme's total assessed valuation per capita, per person, is about $200,000 per person in assessed valuation in Lyme, versus in Grafton County, $148,000. And the tax commitment is around $5,400 in Lyme versus $3,200 in Grafton County. So what this is saying is Grafton County's spending per capita is higher than the county average. Property taxes raised have risen from around $6 million to just over $9 million for municipal and school functions going back to 2008. And the tax rate has risen gradually along with that, as you've added, particularly if you start looking at inflation-adjusted figures, the tax rate has risen by 19% after inflation, 37% before inflation. So part of the increase in the tax rate that you feel is because of inflation, but part of it is because you are spending more for services than you were before. Yeah. The residential tax burden per housing unit is high in Lyme, as I noted earlier, $12,500 per unit in Lyme versus $4,600. In a sense, you are fortunate in that you have significant property values here, high property values that can generate relatively high taxes for the community to spend. Were this not the case, your tax rate would be off the charts. The alternative is, in many communities, the challenge that they face in this regard is that they don't have this high tax base to work with. So they have to have a much higher tax rate to support services that are often inferior. I'm thinking of communities like Franklin, for example, where the tax base is relatively low, costs are still high if you want decent services, so the tax rate gets astronomical. If you look at the municipal and school tax rates, you get to see where a lot of the increase has occurred, in that you've just seen the higher tax rates. Primarily it's coming out of the school spending, okay? This is a school spending chart. The tax rate, this is $10, goes up to $18. This is municipal, relatively level, but the schools a lot higher, okay? So why are your taxes increasing? Why is your tax rate increasing? You are choosing to spend more on schools, and you have excellent quality schools. I feel you're getting your money's worth, but as far as the math of your tax rate goes, this chart explains why it is rising, okay? And this is not something that's dictated to you. It's something that as a community you choose to fund schools, and excellent public schools. And as a result of this, everything's kind of interrelated. You have good schools, therefore you can support high residential property values, okay? So it's kind of, there's an interrelationship there. If you had chosen to flatline school spending, you would not be supporting the kind of residential property values that all of you benefit from. And so there's a correlation there between school spending, quality of schools, and residential property values. So, enrollment trends show most communities in New Hampshire's lost about over 20,000 students over the last decade, primarily because of demographics. Baby boomers not having kids anymore, okay? So in Lyme, there's been a gradual increase in total enrollment from about 264 students in 2007 to 295 students now, total students. This is grades 9 through 12, grades K through 8. So this is actually a healthy sign. This is a sign of a healthy community, that you're able to maintain school enrollment in the face of the dramatic demographic changes that the state is going through. Going forward, statewide, all of the state's population growth is expected to be over age 65 during the next decade. So this is a sign of a vibrant and vital community. It's a good sign. It's a healthy sign. But it also explains a little bit of why you're spending more in schools, just to a degree. Yeah. School enrollment per occupied housing unit is higher than the county average. You have, for 100 units, you have about 40 students. Countywide, about 28. So you are attracting younger households with school-aged children, which is another sign of a balanced community. It's a good thing. Cost per pupil is relatively high. The equalized value per pupil, you have about $1.3 million in tax value to support each student versus a county average of under $1 million. So you're 20% higher. So again, the whole correlation between quality schools, relatively high valued homes comes through in this chart as well. The state average cost per elementary student is around $15,000. Okay, in Lyme you're looking at $20,000. Okay, so it says that you are funding schools at a higher level than the statewide average, and I think that it's reflected again in better quality schools, which in turn support higher residential property values and kind of balance out the non-residential aspect of your tax base, which is minimal. Higher school enrollment than similar-sized Grafton County communities. This is K through 8 enrollment as a percent of population. And again, you're doing very well. You're much higher than the other communities that are comparably sized communities in the county: Rumney, Holderness, Lincoln, Ashland, Grafton, Orford, Warren, Bath, Woodstock, Lisbon. That's going left to right. And it is a sign that you have a nice mix of households in the community. And it's the sign of a healthy community that I don't see very often anymore. So, good. Typical of New Hampshire communities, Lyme is heavily dependent on property taxes to fund town and school functions. 90% of what you spend comes out of property taxes, okay? We were talking earlier about the state kind of, not providing the kind of financial assistance communities that it once did. And so consequently, the burden falls on our local communities, Lyme in this case, to fund most of the services. In this case, 90% of the spending is funded by the property tax. Okay. 67% of your taxes then, once you've gotten to that 90% being property taxes, 2/3 of them go for schools, local education. A little bit is the state education portion, and $7 of your tax rate is municipal functions. Okay, schools are the major deal. Okay, so kind of with that as a backdrop, the question becomes, well, what would happen if we added 100 new housing units in the line? What impact, Russ, do you think that would have? Would it be a big impact, a small impact on the community? And I tried to take into consideration both the revenues that those new units would generate and the costs they would likely to impose. And this is where that first caveat is important to bear in mind, where some costs are fixed and some are variable. So if we add 10 students to this elementary school, 1 per class, probably not a big impact. If you add 100 students, probably a significant impact. So I've tried different scenarios of different number of housing with the guidance from the committee, adding a different quantity of housing units, different quality of housing units, some non-residential development, and said, okay, well, what does this mean for the average taxpayer? And this is really an order of magnitude analysis, okay? It's not something you put a decimal point on, we're just kind of more a couple of digits in, rounding to a couple of digits. Now I'm going to talk you through these. These charts are all on the town website. And I'll go from left to right. It's a lot of numbers to talk about, but there's no other way for me to transmit this to you tonight. So if you added 50 single-family units, right, at the current rate of school generation, and at the current assessed valuation of $450 per unit, okay? That's the scenario. 50 new single-family homes, $450 apiece, generating an average number of students. It comes down, okay, the bottom line, the net revenues after I've allowed for extra municipal costs, plowing roads, maintaining roads, keeping water off the roads on nights like this, you know, that's part of the deal, right? After I allowed for the cost of educating the students, and I separated out what I thought was variable costs, this is the bottom line. The net revenues to the town would be about $300,000. Remember, you raise about $9 million in property taxes. And if you do that per housing unit, it comes down, the net revenues per housing unit come down to $370 a year. Okay, let me go through that one more time. 50 units, single family, generating the same number of students as is now the average. It sugars down to your household, to your house, a saving of around $370 a year. Not a big deal. Oh, townwide, more money, 300 grand. That's meaningful. But then you need to say, okay, well, for the average housing unit, how much is it? A little under $400 a year. So let's try another scenario. Let's do 50 units, again single family, but higher school generation. This is saying, and the committee rightfully pointed out, look, Russ, the new households that are moving into town have a lot of kids. That's why they're moving here. We have good schools, they want good schools, they have more kids. If you do that, and you keep everything else the same assessed valuation, you work it down through the numbers, you get down to this number, $130 per housing unit per year. So this is my estimate. I think if we had 4 economists, these numbers would all be different. Different economists doing this. But I don't think it would come down to saving you $10,000 a year. It's relatively minor savings. At townwide, with that higher school generation, because more students would cost more money, instead of 300 grand to the town, it would be 100,000 to the town. Okay. So let's keep going through these scenarios. I'm just kind of scratching. These are what ifs. Okay, these are what ifs. 50 new units again, but instead of 450, let's make them affordable. Remember, there's a tremendous need for workforce housing in the Upper Valley. Let's say they're only worth $250,000 instead of $450,000. Keep everything the same as this first scenario, where it came down to $370 a housing unit. If they were worth $250, if they were affordable, maybe age restricted. Actually, we do have age restricted here, so these would be affordable units with kids, $70 a year on the average residential tax bill. Okay? And again, this table is on your website. This is not going to be on the test at the end of my presentation. Okay, you have to memorize all these numbers. So we keep going. 50 units, higher school generation with the same lower assessed valuation, drops it down a little bit more. 50 age-restricted units. One of the needs that came up in the course of our discussions with the committee is as people age in place here in Lyme, they want to stay in Lyme, but there's really no place for them to go. There's not an age-restricted community. So there we get no school costs, which saves some money. And that ends up actually being a better deal. That's $420 savings per housing unit in Lyme, $350,000 overall. And then I did condominiums estimate. That would be if they were valued at $350,000. 50 condominiums valued at $250,000, $190 per unit, $159,000 total per year to the town. And then non-residential, I said 100,000 square feet of non-residential. That's probably a market basket, okay? It's about half the size of a typical Walmart. That would save about $330 a year, and overall $278 per housing unit, overall $278,000, okay, over the course of the year. So when I look at these scenarios, all of them, what I find is that you can tweak your town's tax rate a little bit if you grow, but growth probably is not the answer for Lyme if your concern is a lower tax. I'm almost finished, and take all the questions. One moment, please. For the most part, you have a community that works pretty well the way it is. And if you were to say, for those who do believe that a lot of growth is the answer, it's either not feasible in the case of non-residential, or it's not as beneficial. And I want to tell you right out, I have no bias in doing these numbers. I have no bias at all. I just try to do the best I can to support my conclusions, and that is my conclusion with that.